The wind had a bite to it that morning at Maxwell Air Force Base. It was just past 7:15 a.m., and the sky hung low with gray clouds that threatened more rain. A field just off the tarmac had been transformed into a training zone. Cadets stood in tight formation. Boots clean. Shoulders square. Every collar sharp enough to cut. They were waiting for orders. Or maybe just waiting to be seen. Everything about them screamed order and pride. She arrived alone. No salute. No name tag. No insignia. Just a dark blue windbreaker. Jeans. And boots that looked like they had known real ground. Her hair, silver at the roots, was pulled into a simple twist at the nape of her neck. She walked slowly across the edge of the field and stopped just outside the main huddle of cadets. No one moved to greet her. A few glanced her way. Most looked past her. Captain Nolan saw her. He stood at the front, taller than most, chest puffed out slightly like he knew it mattered. He didn't like questions he hadn't asked. And she was a question. She didn't fit. He stared at her like she'd wandered into the wrong briefing. When she didn't flinch, he took a step forward. He picked up her windbreaker from the bench she'd set it on, without ceremony, without a word. He tossed it into the nearest mud puddle. The splash was louder than it should have been. A ripple of awkward chuckles passed through the cadets like a nervous current. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few laughed too loud. She said nothing. She didn't move. Mud soaked into the jacket, darkening the fabric, spreading like a bruiser. Her eyes followed it down, then rose back to Nolan. Calm, unshaken. Her hands remained at her sides. Her shoulders didn't drop. She didn't even blink. That silence, it wasn't passive. It had weight. It made the air around them feel thinner. Nolan seemed to expect something, maybe outrage, maybe retreat. But she gave him nothing. He turned away, smug in his small performance. The others followed suit, some stealing quick glances at the woman standing alone. She remained there, still and steady. Her presence somehow louder than all the noise that had come before. No rank, no reaction, no retreat. And yet something in her stillness suggested she didn't need to prove a thing. Not today, not to him, not to any of them. The simulation kicked off just after 8:30 a.m. A sharp whistle signaled the start, and the cadets sprang into action. The field had been mapped for a full joint force training exercise. On the ground, squads moved through designated corridors marked by temporary barriers, trenches, and mock urban zones. Overhead, student pilots and T-6 Texan II trainers practiced coordinated flyovers, communicating through secured tactical channels. Everything about the operation was built to mirror real-world scenarios, the kind that tested more than just planning. It demanded improvisation, speed, and clarity under pressure. Cadet Captain Nolan took position at the mobile command post, tapping on the digital terrain map and issuing instructions across the ComNet. The exercise was built on Blue Force's advance through uneven terrain, with Red Force laying simulated ambush points and electronic disruptions. Radio chatter buzzed. Spotters called out enemy positions. Fire team leaders checked spacing and formation integrity. A field-grade evaluator muttered observations into a recorder nearby. Glancing between the unfolding drill and the overhead control screens, but the woman didn't look at the screens. She didn't scan the map. She barely moved. She stood apart, a few feet behind the primary observation group, hands clasped behind her back. Her shoulders were relaxed but square. Her boots steady in the thick grass, just off the packed dirt trail. The rain from earlier had left shallow puddles and a damp chill, but she didn't adjust her stance. She didn't shift her weight or glance at the time. She just watched, not the cadets, not the gear. She watched the land. Her gaze moved slowly, deliberately. It tracked the way the brush curved at the base of the ridge, where runoff from the northern slope had carved a shallow groove. She noted where the wind caught the treetops, revealing direction and speed. She followed the staggered movement of Red Force's flank and saw where it would overextend. To most, it was just a training field, but to her, it was already telling a story. The cadets around her glanced at her now and then, still dismissive. She looked like someone's aunt, accidentally assigned to the wrong duty section, but something about her presence disrupted that comfort. There was a kind of still gravity around her, like the air was thicker where she stood, like she wasn't waiting for orders. She was waiting for the moment to act. By 19 a.m., the exercise had slipped its leash. What started as a controlled joint force simulation was unraveling fast. Blue Force, under Nolan's command, was supposed to advance through uneven terrain, coordinate with virtual air support, and secure a ridgeline before Red Force could dig in. But Nolan had brushed off the eastern slope as inaccessible. He missed the signs that Red Force had quietly moved a team behind it. The first burst of simulated fire came from a concealed machine gun nest just below that very ridge. A voice cracked over the radio, shouting contact. Seconds later, another voice yelled for medevac. Lead elements were pinned. The plan? Already thin. Folded fast. Nolan's fingers scrambled across the digital map. He ordered a push to the west, then a fallback, then reversed, both within minutes. Radio channels bled into each other. Cadets were yelling over open comms, interrupting each other, contradicting instructions. The network collapsed into noise. There was no fire control. No tempo. No unity. He raised his voice, hoping volume would bring clarity. It didn't. His orders came too late, or didn't match what squads were seeing on the ground. Some cadets stalled, waiting. Others moved blindly. A reserve team tried to flank the machine gun nest without cover and got cut down in simulation. The casualty count on his console surged. The instructors nearby took notes quietly, glancing at each other with grim expressions. They'd seen this before. Book-smart cadets who couldn't adapt when the plan broke. Nolan's eyes flicked between screens, trying to force the battle back into his model. But the battle was no longer following any model. Meanwhile, she hadn't moved. The woman in civilian clothes stood exactly where she had before. Her eyes followed the flow of movement like she was watching water run downhill. Her expression didn't change. She noted how teams spread too far, how comms collapsed, how Nolan's entire structure failed to respond to contact. To the cadets, it looked like she was doing nothing. But one of the senior observers, a lieutenant colonel with 20 years in the field, glanced at her and stopped writing. Something in her posture, something in the way she tracked the ridgeline and the movements that followed. He leaned in slightly, as if trying to remember where he'd seen that kind of calm before. The chaos raged on, but she remained still, not frozen, anchored. It was 9:24 a.m. when she finally moved. No one saw her take the first step, but once she did, heads began to turn. Not because she made a scene. She didn't. Her boots moved quietly through the wet grass and packed earth. The noise of the failing exercise still echoed across the field, cadets yelling, radios blaring with overlapping calls, simulated fire thudding from loudspeakers placed near the ridgeline. But in the middle of it all, she walked with quiet purpose toward the tactical operations table. No one stopped her. The instructors shifted slightly but didn't interfere. Nolan stood frozen, hands still on the map display, eyes flicking between symbols he no longer understood. When she reached the table, she didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. She picked up a red grease pencil from a holder on the edge of the board. Her hand moved across the laminated map with clean, practiced confidence. 3 lines. Ich deliberate, ich permanent. The first line traced along a dry creek bed that ran east to west. It wasn't marked as a major terrain feature, but it offered low signature movement. Covered, concealed, ideal for silent approach. The second line pointed toward a rocky outcrop on the far side of the ridge. Elevated ground. Stable. Full view of the machine gun nest. Suppression from there would be effective and safe. The final line was shorter. a sharp vector cutting across the rear of the enemy flank. The Red Force had overextended there. Leaving a blind spot, she capped the marker and set it down. Her voice, when it came, was calm and clear, not loud, but it cut through the noise like a rifle shot. You, fire team lead, move your element through the creek bed. You'll reach the ridge undetected. Suppress from the rocks. You, comms, stay with them. Line of sight only. Relay corrections. You, medic, in the creek, your casualties are here. 7 minutes. 19 words. The cadets she spoke to didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. The fire team leader nodded once and turned. Orders rippled out in his wake. Movements sharpened. Voices steadied. Radio calls resumed with clipped, professional cadence. In under 2 minutes, the Overwatch team reached the outcrop. The suppression was clean and fast. The machine gun nest was neutralized. The medic followed, reaching the simulated casualties in just under 7 minutes. The digital map updated in real time. Red Force had collapsed at the flank. The Blue Force, seconds from total failure, surged forward. She didn't celebrate. She didn't explain. She just stepped back from the table, folded her hands behind her again, and resumed her position at the edge of the field, as if that had always been her place. No rank, no command title, no introduction, just 3 lines, 19 words, and everything changed. The silence that followed was total. The radios had gone quiet. The cadets were frozen where they stood, eyes darting between the map and the woman who had just rewritten it. Instructors stood off to the side, tablets in hand, but no longer taking notes. Even the sound of boots on wet ground had stilled. At 9:31 a.m., Brigadier General Michael Reed stepped onto the field. He didn't announce himself. He didn't call attention. He simply walked straight through the center of the formation, his pace even and unhurried. He carried the weight of his rank with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need ceremony to be felt. When he reached her, he stopped exactly 2 feet away, and then, without hesitation, he came to attention and delivered a salute. It was textbook. Palm forward, forearm level, a gesture so crisp it sliced through the tension like a blade. The cadets stared. Not a single one breathed. General Reed held the salute. His voice, when it came, was calm and unmistakable. Major General Elena Vance. I wasn't aware you'd be observing today. It's an honor to have you back on the ground. The name dropped like thunder. Vance didn't respond immediately. She simply returned a small nod. Subtle and precise. Reed dropped his hand, but his posture remained stiff, his tone reverent. For those of you who don't recognize her, allow me to educate you. Major General Vance commanded Task Force Atlas for 5 years. She wrote the asymmetric warfare doctrine you've all been tested on. She holds 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, 3 Silver Stars, and a combat record longer than your training manuals. The field shifted. You could feel it. Every cadet who had laughed now stood completely still. Nolan's face had gone pale. He looked like he'd been punched in the chest. His eyes locked on her. The woman he had mocked without a second thought. His breath caught. His voice was gone. Reed wasn't finished. She's one of the few officers in Army history to rise to 2-star rank after frontline command. She led missions you'll never read about, made decisions that saved lives you'll never meet. And today, she corrected this exercise in 30 seconds without raising her voice. Nolan didn't move. Couldn't. The shame wasn't loud. It was cold, heavy, absolute. Vance didn't gloat. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. The library at Maxwell was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles only in the early afternoon. It was 2:30 p.m. Light poured in through tall windows, soft and warm against rows of history books and faded carpet. Near the back, tucked into a corner beside a shelf of doctrine manuals, sat Major General Elena Vance. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple blouse, slacks, and reading glasses. A copy of On War rested open in her lap, pages dog-eared and underlined. She read slowly, her fingers moving slightly as if tracing something invisible on the page. Nolan hesitated near the doorway for almost a full minute before stepping in. He walked carefully, the folded windbreaker cradled in his arms like something fragile. His posture had changed, shoulders squared, but not stiff, eyes steady, but softer. The weight of the last few days clung to him. When he reached her, he didn't speak at first. He simply held out the jacket, cleaned, pressed, dry. She looked up, met his eyes, then accepted it with a quiet nod. No thanks, no judgment. He sat across from her, cleared his throat once, failed to speak, tried again. He said he was sorry. For the disrespect, for the pride, for assuming he understood leadership just because he'd studied it, for treating her like a stranger instead of someone who had walked the ground he still feared. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't reach for praise or reprimand. She reached for a napkin from the coffee counter nearby, unfolded it, and pulled a red grease pencil from her bag. She drew 3 shapes: the ridgeline, the creek bed, the false flank. She explained, not with superiority, but with clarity. She showed how the slope he'd dismissed wasn't a barrier, but an asset, how elevation gave vision, how terrain was never the enemy, only your assumptions were. He leaned in, nodding slowly, watching every stroke she made. It wasn't about the pencil or the drawing. It was about how she saw, how she read the field, not by the plan in her head, but by what was actually there. She wasn't teaching him tactics. She was teaching him to see. When she handed him the napkin, it was creased and slightly smudged. He folded it like something sacred. That day, Nolan didn't become a different man, but he stopped pretending he already was one. The pencil is still there, mounted in a glass frame just outside the strategy room at Maxwell. A simple red grease pencil rests on a plain white cloth. Below it, a small plaque reads, "See the terrain," not the rank. No one explains it anymore. They don't need to. Every cadet who walks past it before a major exercise understands. They've heard the story: the woman with no stripes on her sleeves, no command on her nameplate, just calm hands, clear eyes, and a map. They call it the pencil doctrine now. She didn't leave a debrief, didn't ask to be remembered. She never came back, but her influence stayed, embedded in the way instructors brief missions, in the way senior officers pause before speaking, in the way cadets carry themselves when they think no one is watching. Years later, in a valley outside Mosul, the storm was building, a dry wind at first, then zand, fast, thick, no visibility beyond 20 meters. Comms were patchy. Air support was out of range. A younger lieutenant wanted to fall back, stick to the book, but Captain Nolan knelt in the dust and drew in the sand. He marked a drainage line just ahead, used the approaching storm to mask their advance, placed a fire team where the ridgeline would break the wind, then looped his medic to the rear, not to pull back, but to cover a casualty point he predicted before the first round was fired. It worked. No one died that day. Later, when the after-action report was read, someone asked how he had seen it coming. Nolan didn't say much, just folded the corner of the report and tapped the edge with his thumb. Some lessons don't need retelling. They're not about orders. They're about presence. At Maxwell, the instructors still tell the story. A senior master sergeant, 30 years in, taps the pencil case with the back of his finger before every field exercise. Cadets lean in, trying to absorb something from the glass. They speak of her in half sentences now, not with myth, but with a kind of reverence. The quiet woman who spoke 19 words and changed a generation. Her strength was never in the stars on her collar, It was in how she saw, she's not a statue. She's not a chapter in a textbook. She's the standard they measure themselves against, quietly. The one they hope to become,